Hi book friends, I'm Erin, and this is Erin Go Read. So this is kind of annoyingly my second go at filming my April wrap-up part 2, which also serves as my OWL Readathon wrap-up. I originally filmed this with my adorable 7-month-old niece in my lap because she woke up from her nap, right as I was about to start filming, but then something happened with the video file and I can't get it to upload, so annoying. So this might end up being a much faster wrap-up than the original one was, but minus the cuteness of the baby. So maybe I'll be able to at least get part of that video in. So I read 12 total books in April. The first, including a possible DNF, 6 are in the part 1 of my wrap-up. I completed 7 more books in the second half of April, and I ended up with 11 OWLs in total. So I have a few that were library books and or audiobooks, so I don't have a physical book to hold up for you. The first is a cozy mystery, Agatha Raisin and the Vicious Vet by M.C. Beaton. This is the second in the Agatha Raisin series, and it takes place in this little town in the Cotswolds in England, and Agatha Raisin is a kind of early retired professional woman. She had a very successful professional life, and she's able to retire in her 50s, and she just wants this simple little life, but she can't seem to keep herself out of everyone's business, and particularly out of the police investigations. So a young veterinarian moves to the town, and all of a sudden all the women for some reason want to go bring their seemingly perfectly healthy animals to see him. And then shortly after, the vet ends up dead. And so Agatha and her neighbor, he's a retired, I can't remember if it was like Navy captain or Army colonel, her next door neighbor, end up kind of bonding over being really interested in the mystery of what was going on. And so there's this constant back and forth kind of sexual chemistry, not sexual chemistry, between the two of them, which was really fun, especially because in the first book, he basically avoids her all the time, and she knows that he's home, and she's knocking on the door, and he doesn't answer, and so it was a fun little mystery tryst they end up having. The next book was a graphic novel by Dark Horse, The Secret Loves of Geek Girls, and this was the original video, I still had it from the library, but I think I literally just returned it yesterday. But anyhow, so it was a graphic novel / short essay collection written by women who deem themselves a geek for whatever reason. And so some of them were told in these short, 3 to 5 page essays. Some of them were in actual comic form. And there were stories and musings about elements of their lives that are somehow impacted by them being a geek in whatever way that manifests itself. And my favorite one was about a woman realizing that she was having a hard time establishing relationships with men because she's used to being a fan. And so basically these real life males weren't holding up to her idealized notion of what a man should be in her fantasy novels or her comic books. So I like that one a lot. Next up, I do have a copy of The Poisonwood Bible by Barbara Kingsolver. This is the Harper Perennial Centennial Edition, which is beautiful, has French flaps, which I loved, and this was my herbology owl, as it has a plant on the cover, and I really enjoyed this. The basic synopsis is we have a Southern Baptist family, a husband and wife, and their 4 daughters who go to the Congo for a year-long mission. And the father is a Baptist minister, and he's a very kind of, from what I understand, prototypical Southern Baptist. And I am a Reformed Baptist, and there's some very significant differences in the theological views that I hold to, which I think are more biblical than what he holds to. And then we're also in the 60s, and so there are some different, very of the time kind of gender role and treatment of women, I suppose, that is at play here. And although the minister feels like he basically is trying to earn his salvation through bringing as many people as he can to Jesus. And you see a lot of the inconsistencies in the way that he actually lives his life, not so much according to the gospel, and this need to just convert people regardless of how he treats them, or without regard for their culture and getting to know the people. He's just trying to bludgeon them over the head with it. And one of the examples is that there's a river near this village, and there are crocodiles in the river. And he keeps telling the people that he wants to baptize them. Like, all he wants to do is baptize them. And they're thinking, this crazy white man wants to feed our children to the crocodiles. And so that's the perspective that they have, because he's not taking the time to get to know them and understand their customs and who they are. And so I thought this was really, really great. The first like 2/3 or so, I was super into it. That's where we're following them actually in the Congo. The other part that I loved about this book is that each chapter is told from a perspective of one of the females. So the wife and the 4 daughters, and including there's a 5-year-old daughter. There are twins who are, I think, 14 at the start of it. One of whom doesn't speak. She was born with the left side of her brain, like, not formed. And that's where your speech and language centers are. But she is brilliant, and she was probably my favorite perspective. And then her twin sister and the oldest sister, Rachel, who's a little bit of like a debutante, kind of quite self-involved. And so you are hearing about the same timeline and events from each of these females' perspectives. And then we get to a point where we have like the climax kind of their time in the Congo. And then after that, it goes from being this much more day in the life, slow-paced, at least chronologically speaking, story, to the narrative structure moves to jumping around time to time, and they've now left the village in the Congo, and they are separated. And so their family becomes just disjointed, and the story a little bit becomes disjointed, because you're not following the same storyline anymore. And I was just much less compelled to pick it up at that point. By the end of it, I was much more invested and interested in picking it up to find out like the outcomes of where they go. So there was a little bit of a dip in it as far as my interest level goes, but all in all, I really love this book, and I highly recommend it. The next up was an audiobook that I got from my library audiobook service, The Cruelest Month by Louise Penny. And this is another mystery. This is a detective mystery that takes place in, they're outside Montreal, or in Montreal, outside Montreal. They're outside of Montreal in Canada, and this cozy little town of Three Pines, there tends to be a lot of mischief that ends up happening in this sleepy little town. And Detective Armand Gamache and his team come to the town to solve the mystery. And we have the way that this is the third in this Armand Gamache series. And as it's going, you have the mystery itself that's happening, and the involvement of any of the detectives involved, and the people in the town, and everyone involved in the actual mystery story. And then we have the background story of kind of some police corruption that's been going on in the Cioté. And we get a lot of that going on right now, or in this book, kind of behind the scenes stuff that had happened in the past that's now coming up in the present, and is really affecting Gamache's personal and professional life, and then how that kind of impacts his ability to investigate the current mystery. So I really enjoy that one. I can't wait to get to the next one. I really like listening to these ones on audiobook. I like the narrator. Sorry, I don't know what his name is. I heard from one of my friends that reads this series as well that the narrator ends up passing away at some point. And so I'm not sure at what book it is that the narrator changes, But for now, at least, I really enjoy this narrator, and it's a book that I would I haven't read any of them in physical form, but I enjoy the audiobook of it so much that I just always put the next one on hold with my library, and whenever it becomes available, I'll listen to it. Oh, and the Cruelest month was History of Magic, as it was a book that was written over 10 years ago. I think it was written in 2007, if I remember correctly. And then next up, we have Care of Magical Creatures, which was a book featuring a land animal, and we have Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. And my husband and I read this together, so Sam earned his Astronomy Owl for Morning Star by Pierce Brown, and then his Care of Magical Creatures owl. So Sam ended up earning 2. And I don't need to say much about Harry Potter. It had been about 3 years since we had read the series together, and it was just so fun to be back into it. And book 1, I think, has a particular nostalgia because the problems that they're facing are so kind of minor compared to what will happen. It's so fast. I was blown away just by how quickly we got through the book. And also I forgot about how much Harry and Ron are just so annoyed by Hermione at the beginning, and then she ends up becoming their friend after they face adversity together. So always great to read Harry Potter. Next up, totally different. This is a nonfiction book, The Reformation, How a Monk and a Mallet Changed the World by Stephen J. Nichols. So this is kind of an overview. White balance isn't great on that. Kind of an overview of the history of the Reformation and kind of the beginning of the Protestant church. And so we have particular looks at events and major players. So Martin Luther, of course. I think it was the very last chapter highlights women in particular who were involved in the Reformation. And this is, what did this care for? This was, Defense Against the Dark Arts, a book starting with the word R. And I really enjoyed this. It doesn't go in depth anything, but it's a really good place to start for just an understanding of what is the Reformation, why did we need the Reformation, and kind of who was involved in it. And then if you wanted to study more deeply into others, you have some jumping off places to dig more deeply. If you're interested in the Reformation in general, a really great historical fiction look at this is Ken Follett's A Column of Fire. This is a complete aside. I read this a couple years ago, but this looks at the period of the Reformation from characters in France who by law must be Catholic but are actually Protestant, and they are secretly and illegally making copies of the Bible and disseminating works by Martin Luther and Erasmus, and they're doing this at great risk to themselves and their family. And then we have characters in England who are actually Catholic, but they must be Protestant, and it's really interesting, and it takes place in 1558. And this is the third book in the kind of loose Kingbridge series, which starts with Pillars of the Earth. So we could certainly read this completely on its own. Pillars of the Earth is my favorite book, though, so I would recommend reading that. So that's just an aside for you. Finally, for Ancient Runes, a retelling. This is Fables Volume 1. So this is a graphic novel, obviously. The premise of this is we have our fairy tale characters have been exiled from their homelands by the adversary. So this bad guy comes in, and there's all this war and everything that happens in their homelands, and in later volumes you get more information about what that time was like. For now, you just know that all of a sudden all of these fairy tale characters like Jack from Jack and the Beanstalk and Snow White and the Big Bad Wolf, the Three Little Pigs, they are living in Manhattan secretly. The animals, or the fairy tale characters who cannot take on a human form, the pigs example from the Three Little Pigs, they live on a farm in upstate New York. The rest of the characters, or everyone, has had what they call the amnesty. So once they left their homelands, basically any crime or foul that they had committed, their slates are wiped clean and they start anew. The big bad wolf, for example, takes on a human man form, and he goes by Bigby Wolf, and he's the sheriff. And so while there is some animosity still toward him from certain characters, he's a new man, and he's all about justice and keeping things running smoothly in their new Fable town, they call it. So King Cole is the mayor, Snow White is his like deputy director, and she's the one who actually kind of runs things. So it's not a retelling per se of any particular story, but it's like a reimagining of, or an imagining of what would happen if our fairy tale characters could no longer live in their fairy tale lands and had to live in our world. One of my favorite things, just like a comical little bit, is that Snow White and Sleeping Beauty and Cinderella, they all had Prince Charming. Well, he's the same man. And so there's one Prince Charming, and they all kind of hate him, and he's a womanizer, and he's always kind of tricking mundane women to sleep with him, and he like mooches off of them and everything. So I had originally read this, 15 years ago, maybe over 10 years ago for certain. It was before my husband was injured, and I think I have like the first 12 volumes or so. So this is the beginning of my reread of that series. So that wraps up my April part 2. I will link the April wrap up part 1 down below. Thank you for reading. Did I just say thank you for reading? So that concludes my April wrap up part 2 and my summary of my OWLS accomplishments. 11 owls out of 12. Not too bad. The only one that I didn't earn, if you weren't keeping track, was divination. I'm okay with that. Thank you for watching. Okay. Bye from me and Charlie. Yeah. Look at your little donkey ears bounce. Oh, there's a smile. There's a happy girl. See you around the tubes.